Well, I do think there's a lot of work that's going on both sides of the Capitol, both in the House and the Senate, with all the issues on the table. And I know the border security issue is one that's important to make sure that we maintain our position as a country of laws. But I do think that many, many people in this country understand we have a very humble tradition of immigration and being immigrants in this country. You know, my grandparents came.
Well, I'm an immigrant.
Right, and my grandparents.
And so is Muhammad, actually.
Sure, from Eastern Europe at the turn of the last century. And if it wasn't for the decision and their ability to come here, I wouldn't be sitting here either. So we have to balance that tradition with what the president was talking about, the border security and the enforcement of the existing laws. And I think there's just a lot of areas for us to agree, but thus far, neither side has yet sort of produced that.
Well, it's been on board, you know, obviously on the issue of border security. What would you trade off with security for this path of citizenship for the 11 million undocumented workers?
Well, there's a lot of issues involved in the 12 million people. There's a lot of discussion going on about worker permits, updating the antiquated worker permits in the ag industry, the high-tech industry, and others. Much of that has a lot of support. I think, though, that this is an issue where if we step back for a second, think about the kids who were brought here due to no fault of their own, unbeknownst to them in many instances, and they really know no other place than America as home. I really think that if we can't get our arms around the larger bill, which I think everybody hopes we can resolve the situation, but certainly we could all say that those kids here in America do deserve a path to citizenship and a future in this country.
But this is also, and Mohammed, I want you to weigh in on the business side of it, but this is also a part of an issue, a larger issue for the Republican Party, meaning defining the issues on immigration is all part of sort of this new idea or this new rebranding of the GOP that you've been spearheading, which is Americans want to know, what do the Republicans really feel about immigration? What do they really feel about gay marriage? What do they really feel about these issues that are more perhaps Democratic issues than they have been Republican?
Well, I think, Betty, the history of our party has been one of opportunity and growth. You know, I know, Mohammed, you're here talking a lot about creating the conditions for more growth and the things that need to take place in Washington. And I would say if you look at immigration, it was the Republican House that put across the floor last fall a bill to increase the number of individuals from foreign countries who are here studying in our master's and PhD programs and allowing them to have that green card. I mean, as we know right now, the situation is with the STEM graduates, it's so difficult for them to be able to stay here that oftentimes they leave and take their venture capital with them.
Yeah.
We don't want that. And it was Republicans who brought that forward. Unfortunately, we didn't have much bipartisan support that back then. We hope that this year will be different because it is for us about opportunity. It is about creating the conditions for everybody. Even those who are sitting in failing schools, those students, we want to help them get the tools so they can get up on this ladder of opportunity.
Leader Cantor, let me ask you a question that's on many people's minds, and today's numbers speak to that, which is our economy came out of the ICU after the global financial crisis, is out of the hospital, but is only able to walk. It's not able to run because it's structurally impaired. And a lot of the things that you talk about are really structural impairments to the economy. Are people like me simply fools and naive to expect a middle ground in Congress? Or are the dynamics that it's going to have to tip one way or the other at some point, and as we get closer to the election, we should expect more polarization rather than middle ground? So how should we think of this?
I certainly hope it's the former, Mohammed. I hope that all of us can work towards a solution now. We've gotten the election behind us last November, obviously a very contentious election. With issues like taxes and health care in the forefront where the disagreement really lies. The way I look at it is there was a significant increase in taxes on the first of the year, and now it's time for us to focus on trying to do something about reducing spending, addressing the unfunded liabilities connected with the health care entitlement programs. I think most folks who are looking at this do identify those unfunded liabilities and the uncontrolled costs connected with our healthcare system, the disproportionate cause of the deficit and the mounting debt. We've got to address that problem. And, you know, for the first time now, and I think about 4 years, we have both houses having produced a budget. This does give way to a process, at least opens up.
But they're both so far apart.
Right, but for the first time, again, in about 4 years, we do have the opportunity to see a process unfold in which you can actually sit down at a table and air the differences and try and
At least you
reach
got
a
the numbers
solution.
out there. Right. Leader Cantor, let me just play for you a comment that Senator John McCain had made to, on our program, Political Capital, where he talked about a grand bargain. And he said, look, he is a Republican, would be open to more revenue. I just want to hear, I just want to play for you what he said in this interview.
The question is will that translate into what I think we've got to do sooner or later, and that's a grand bargain. And I am more than willing to give the President of the United States the opportunity to sit down and work with us, and we may have to make some concessions on our side.
So he's saying maybe the Republicans have to accept more revenue in order to get to the grand bargain. Do you agree with him?
Well, what I saw January 1 around the fiscal cliff deal was an absence of any attention to the underlying problem, again, which are these mounting unfunded liabilities. And the position we take is you got to fix the problem. You can't keep digging the hole deeper. So join us in coming up with solutions to try and address that. And it was a real missed opportunity back in the beginning of the year. And I know that Speaker Boehner joins me in saying we should have had the ability to address some of those spending issues at the time that the president was so insistent.
But you didn't
right.
Get right.
So in my conversations with the White House, I have said to them, I said, look, you've gotten your revenue plug at this point. Let's focus on the problem at hand, and we can all work together.
Leader, there's an old saying, don't make the best the enemy of the good. And there's a sense that there's no momentum in Washington, right? So yes, we have a process, but what we really need is content, right? So is there any practical sense in making compromises early on to get some momentum and not let the best be the enemy of the good?
Well, Mohammed, I actually think it's a little better than even what you portray, because I'm a big believer in that. You can't let that perfect be the enemy of the good. You won't get anything done. And you know, something happened in November, which sort of dictated the fact that we were going to see revenue hikes. And as we know, that fiscal cliff deal ended up with $650 billion of new revenue over 10 years, right? That was certainly not perfect in the eyes of many of us, again, for the real problem that there was no movement towards addressing the real issues of the budget. I think all of us know that we want to see growth come back to this country. You know, I won't accept, and I don't think anybody on the Hill wants to accept this anemic growth that the country is languishing in right now. We're America. You know, we ought to continue to rev up this engine, especially with all the other problems in the other regions of the world that you've been talking about this morning.
Right.
We have an unbelievable opportunity, and I do think that that's infecting the mindset in Washington to try and get something done.
But would you, and I have to go back on that, though, would you, though, I know what you're saying, and Leader Cantor, you've said this to me many times, which is no more revenue. You're done with that. But I just got to bring that up one more time, because it sounds as if, you know, some of the Republicans within your party are saying maybe we do have to concede to that. Maybe we do have to do that in order to get this issue resolved and done with.
Well, my point is we've already done that. And that's the point, and that's the point of my discussions.
But I think they know that as well.
Right, that's my point of the discussions at the White House, is to tell them, look, you've already done that. And you've already moved now towards taking capital out of the private sector and trying to address the deficit in Washington in that way, where you've not addressed the unfunded liabilities and the continuing mounting of the debt.
Yeah.
With the goal for all of us is to return to a growth-oriented economy and put people back to work and get investment capital flowing so we can see the growth that we'd like to in this country.
Well, talking about jobs and getting people back to work, I know that you've been a big proponent, obviously, and creator of the Skills Act, which is essentially trying to consolidate, right, all the work training programs around the country. And it did pass in the House, and it's on its way to the Senate. But uniformly, the Democrats have rejected this. I mean, they've opposed this because they say this is basically a one-size-fits-all type of initiative. Whereas it leaves out, and we've talked about this, leaves out the poor and the and the disaffected, the disabled and other minority groups. That's what they're saying this bill is about.
First of all, I would say that that description is inaccurate because specifically we maintain protections for veterans, for the disabled, for the poor, to allow them access and even enhanced access to some assistance. The impetus for the bill came from the General Accounting Office and its recommendations of how to go about slimming down the government and getting rid of the waste. We have almost 50, I think 50 federal workforce training programs right now, 50, and they are implemented by several different agencies, departments. I mean, you can imagine, and it's a bureaucratic mess. And what we said is we want to get the unemployed an opportunity to have the work skills they need to access the new positions in the new industries of the future. We know there are 400,000 to 500,000 openings in the healthcare sector alone right now because there are individuals without the skills to fill those jobs. Same thing with the natural gas industry, a lot of open positions right now. So each region of the country may have different workforce needs. What we want to say is allow employers and those community colleges and other training centers the opportunity to craft the proper training programs to allow for access to fill the jobs.
Then why didn't it get more support then?
Well, again, I think it sort of goes back to your initial question about Washington. You know, we have to get more practice in the ability to work together and not have a knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, because this came from the other side, I'm not going to support it, right? And so I think, again,
because it's likely going to die in the Senate.
Well, hopefully not, because this is a GAO recommendation, General Accounting Office. This is as neutral as you get in Washington. And, you know, the workforce training programs, that should be something that we could agree on. Again, this is not something like trying to address the Medicare issue. This is really a program that's designed to help people out of work. I think we can all agree on this is better to allow for more flexibility there with the proper protections. And we've always said we want to sit down and work with you. Tell us if there's legitimate concerns. Be glad to sit down and work it out.
So, Leader Cantor, the theme so far is that this political polarization and dysfunction creates headwinds to an economy that's incredibly entrepreneurial and innovative, right? So it's holding back. And I think that's correct, and it's important that you and others speak to that with a view to reducing this headwind. Now, if a political scientist was sitting here, he or she would say, hey, wait a minute, it's something else. And that is that the political system, the traditional parties, are starting to lose the confidence that citizens have in the system. Now, we've seen in Europe what can happen. The Italian elections, you get no government.
Yeah.
We've seen it in Greece, we've seen it in Cyprus. How worried are you that at some point citizens are going to say this system simply doesn't produce?
Well, I think the one thing about America is, you know, we are very unique in our system of government and the separation of the branches, which does provide for a little bit of perspective versus most of our European counterparts.
Usually it works, the checks and balances.
It does. And there's a certain brilliance to what the framers came up with, and I know it's a struggle, frustrating for all of us. But I think to your point, Mohammed, it's an amazing transformation that's going on out there. And it has to do with the digital age, and it has to do with access to information.
Yeah.
And my hope is that we can open up more of Washington so that the public can engage. I mean, what we really need in order for things to move is for the people of the country to have a sense of investment in their government. And the only way we can do that is to provide more openness, more transparency. We've got a project that is coming out of my office called Citizens Co-Sponsor, and it'll be unveiled formally soon. And it will allow for the access of information, the ability for application software writers to take that information and allow people to use it to help better their lives.